Hi, I'm Christy Cordingley, and this is my show, The Flare Up Show, and this special episode is produced in partnership with Clarissa Burt and In the Limelight Media. I originally created this show to advocate for myself through chronic illness, but today it's grown into a wellness show that's listened to all over the world. I love to practice well-being for the whole being. So if you're ready to rise, thrive, and elevate your life, stay tuned, enjoy the show, and thanks for listening. All right, welcome to the Flare Up Show, produced by Clarissa Burt and In the Limelight Media. And today I have Roxanne Howe-Murphy. She is a best-selling author, a pioneering thought leader, and teacher. She grew up in a small farm in the Midwest, the vast dark skies and millions of stars. I love your bio, by the way. Not only awed her, but helped inspire her curiosity from a young age as to her place in the universe. A thread that she has carried throughout her life is her capacity for recognizing the potential that lives within us all and exploring interconnections that were not often visible to others at the time. She has served on the faculty of universities on both coasts and co-wrote her first book that challenged predominant thinking and practices affecting individuals with disabilities. She's a pioneer in integrating the worlds of the Enneagram and coaching, authoring one of the first books of its kind, Deep Coaching, using the Enneagram as a catalyst for profound change. Internationally published, she is the author of the Amazon #1 international bestseller and multi-award-winning book in the body, mind, spirit field, Deep Living with the Enneagram, Recovering Your True Nature. Her most recent book is Underneath Your Personality, Discover Greater Well-Being Through Deep Living with the Enneagram. Roxanne founded an Enneagram coaching school and served as a senior faculty until 2022. She co-founded and is board emeritus of the Deep Living Lab, a social impact nonprofit. She teaches internationally and has been a frequent presenter at International Enneagram Association conferences since 2011. That's a lot of sense. So good. I didn't want to shorten it because it's all beautiful and perfect, and I want people to know how special you are. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so excited about this, Christy. So I'm excited to share my passion, your passion, and see what we come up with.
Yeah,
how we can have value for your listeners and viewers.
Absolutely. I want to just start at the beginning with sort of what your practice has been and that sort of melding of the coaching with the Enneagram and going into, what you call deep living. Could you share a little bit about that? Where you started with this and sort of what it's evolved into?
Well, sure. Actually, what I'll take you back to some of the early. No, I'm really good. I'm just thinking about how much of this I can share because it could take a longer time than we have. So I was a coach. I came out of higher education and decided to leave that environment because I was looking for something else in my work and with the people I was working with. Mm-hmm. And so I started a coaching practice. And you know what, Chrissy, I felt like I wasn't getting to the core kind of underlying issues of what people were presenting, but what they were bringing in. And it's like, or that the outcomes wouldn't be sustainable. And so I had been introduced to the Enneagram. And honestly, when I was first introduced a long time ago, I was kind of turned off. I thought, oh my gosh, this is just another typing tool and it's going to, put me in a box and I'm not interested. Actually, I think I wasn't ready for what I was to learn about the Enneagram. So I had this coaching program and I was talking to my own coach and he said, I think you should take a look at another orientation to the Enneagram. So I did, and I ended up going to a 1-week retreat. And it was with the late Richard Riso, who was a mentor of mine, and Russ Hudson, who's still teaching and doing great work around the world. And on the first night of the retreat, now this doesn't happen to me typically, but see, I'm sitting there and I really don't know that much about the Enneagram. I don't know very much at all about the personality, really, what that really means. And Don, I think, said something and I kind of had shivers. And then I felt this is so wild. I felt invisible arms,
Oh.
hands on my arms and shoulders. And this is what I heard. This is your work.
Hmm.
And I heard it a couple of times, and I had no idea what I was saying yes to, but I said yes. And so that was kind of the, okay, where are we going? And as I dug into it more, I of course studied for years with them and others, but I started writing the deep coaching book. And it took me quite a few years to do that. Deep coaching with the deep coaching using the Enneagram as a catalyst for profound change. And that book really helped me, as I was writing it, dive into what these deeper levels were and what else was there besides the personality? What were people not connecting to? Because I'll tell you, so many people come into coaching thinking there's something wrong with them. Yes. And thinking that they have to fix themselves. And it's like, no, this is not about fixing yourself. It's just going underneath the layers, and the personality is on top, and kind of going underneath the layers and letting go of some things that aren't needed any longer and seeing what you discovered. And so much of our, essential nature is underneath those layers. Sometimes we have to go through some some of the obstacles, of course, but what's underneath is so precious. And it's not like we don't have a personality. We always have a personality, but it's like, does it have us rather than we just have one, and oftentimes, and I found in my own life, boy, does my personality have me. So that led me to do so much inner work, really, since I started this work. I mean, I was doing inner work before, but it didn't touch for the last 20 something years.
I'm just giggling because yesterday I was doing a facilitation and it went well, but there was one person that sent in kind of a harsh review afterwards, and I was laying in bed eating chocolate, and I was researching for today, and I was reading something you had written about the inner critic and sort of that ego code, and I was like crying and laughing, and my husband walked in and he's like, I'm like, oh, I was quoting Ted Lasso. I'm like, I need to be the goldfish and just have that 10-second memory. Like,
Yeah, right.
I just need to hug myself. It's okay. It's okay if someone does not think you're everything. It's okay. Like,
yeah, isn't it funny? I mean, being a teacher for many, many years, as well as a coach, how easy it is to focus on the one comment that may not be glowing, and you might get a lot of glowing comments or appreciative feedback. Yeah, and it's like, but the focus, and that is the inner critic going, oh, you see, this is something you haven't worked on yet. You've got to do this. Do better, and we'll probably talk more about the inner critic as we go along, because it is such a crucial part of the personality structure.
It really is. I would like to go back a little bit because I know, like, in your work with the Enneagram, and you've already described this. I mean, we often look to the outside world for validation or to figure out who we are, because as humans, it's all relevant. So we try to compare as a navigation to other people. But what I love about the Enneagram is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if my understanding of it is incorrect, you can correct me. But the way I see the Enneagram, same thing. I was like, oh, it's just another typing system. We've used DISC and work, and okay, we get it. But then I was like, oh, this is actually behavior at its core. Like, it's the intention. And we can all do the same things, but have very different intentions. So I can't judge my behavior based on someone else's use of that behavior. Like, I sort of took it as like a really simple example, like a knife in a surgeon's hand saves lives, and a murderer's hands, it kills and murders, right? Like, it's really about, there's a deep need inside of us. There's a deep essence of us, of who we are. And it is that embracing and understanding who it is with love and empathy, rather than going, I wish I was that number, or I wish I was that person. Is that somewhat close to?
Well, yeah, it's the external expression, and the external expression can also be behavior. And, I guess a form of behavior is our emotional experience. And so what I love about the Enneagram is that it incorporates both our body awareness, our sensations, that intelligence that lives in the body that is always there, because the body is the one thing that is always here, right?
Yeah.
And then our heart intelligence and what that has to show us, and also where we get kind of stuck within with the heart, maybe closing down or holding on to certain emotions and just continuing them, rolling them around and around and around, and thinking that that's who we are, as well as our mental state, our mind, our thinking, and the stories. You were talking about the stories. Yeah, we all have stories that we tell ourselves, and that's all they are. They're stories. They're not based on, for the most part, they're not based on what is truly real, because we have an interpretation of things that actually kind of fits into our whole life story. I mean, these patterns from the personality go way back into our childhood, because that's just what we didn't have the resources, the internal resources, to know how else to respond. So the way we're wired, even early on, those patterns get set in place, and then we think, well, that's just who I am.
And it's not. Those
And it's not.
change. We can change. You talk about that. You can change personality. So how do you see deep living? How do we sort of get beyond that surface or that external piece and get more into the deep living where we're truly at our essence?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think that many viewers might relate to is that how the personality kind of responds to the external life. So in other words, I'm okay as long as certain conditions are met. And those conditions are how people might be, how I perceive people treating me, or do I think I did well on that particular project, or should I, the inner critic comes into play here too. But it's like, I can only be okay if those conditions are met. And so that keeps us on one thing that keeps us on the surface. So the deep living really is to say, hey, we're not just doers. We're not just this mechanistic being, a person that has to be fixed, and that is only able to be at the surface level. We are really whole human beings that incorporates our inner life, our spiritual life, our infinite nature, our essential nature. And that doesn't seem to be as easy. It's not as easy for us to connect with, because it's not how we've been socialized. It's not how we think of ourselves. I mean, schools, education kind of knocked a lot of that away from us, right? Mm-hmm. So deep living is really an orientation to life. And it's based on compassion and, values of being curious about ourselves, being willing to kind of challenge ourselves. What do I think I am right now? And what's really going on within me? So being curious about that. It's based on being more truthful, with ourselves, but with compassion and kindness. So, it's interesting that if we orient to allowing all of ourselves in and not rejecting parts that we think are unacceptable, that's a lot of what's going on. I accept certain things about myself that doesn't fit with my self-image, right? I don't get angry. Kidding me? Oh, that would be awful. If I got angry, I might upset somebody. So God
forbid someone doesn't like me. I get it.
I know. So, it's this integration, if we can accept more of who we are, and eventually all of who we are, including our personality and what's underneath it and our essential nature. So, for me, Chrissy, this just gives me so much hope, because we get so stuck in the personality and think that that's who we are. And that is the cause of so much struggle, so much conflict in our own lives, but also in our families, our communities. We can see the conflict around the world, So I just think, just know that there's so much more to us, and that there are ways to connect to that. And the Enneagram is and is it, maybe Enneagram, because not everyone may know what that word is, right? Enneagram, yeah. That the Enneagram kind of first kind of reveals and gives us information on how we most relate to ourselves. That is at the personality level. And then what we learn becomes a doorway into going deeper within us. So we have to start someplace. And we start with what is most accessible, most available to us. If we started just with, oh my gosh, I'm a joyful person, but I never feel joyful, so that feels false, then it's hard to do work with it. But if we start with, oh, I've learned something about myself here, about my particular patterns. Oh, all right. Let me just work with each, the patterns as they show up without judgment. That's the key, without judgment.
Yes. You said at the beginning that you're going to get put in a box or labeled, and that's really not what it's about at all. It's not as simple as going online, taking a quiz and understanding who you are, and that's who you are forevermore. It's much more nuanced, and it's almost like a decoder ring to ourselves that we can use to help decipher stuff. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. I was just talking to a person the other night. I was introduced to her, and the person who introduced us said, "Now, Roxanne, she does the Enneagram." And I could feel this woman, who's this brilliant person, I just loved her, but I could feel her kind of pulling back. And so she asked me about it. She said, so I suppose you go into organizations and you tell people, what their type is. And then, I go, no. Now there are people that do that, right?
Yes.
But, and she said, that scares me because I know I'm so much more than what I've been told I am by other people, or what the test shows. I'm so much more than that. Yeah. So she's already kind of keyed into it, but she got scared and turned off because her perception was that if you're working with the Enneagram, that means boom, you're constricted, you're narrowed in, rather than, I haven't been in this box. Yes. There's a way out of this box.
Absolutely. It's funny. I worked at a place once where they brought in like a typing system, not the Enneagram, something different. And then it was really interesting. They didn't tell us how to use it. I was very young at the time. They didn't tell us how to use it. So then it just became like weaponized language that we could use to judge each other, be like, you shouldn't do that. You're this personality. You can't do that. You're that. And you're sort of like, no, I don't think this is the purpose. Please tell us, the why and the how to use this information, not just put it in our hands and be like, well, good luck with that, because it can be, it's not real safe or great to just put people into boxes and assume things. It's not really being a community at that point. So
yeah. Well, you used a really good term, weaponizing. And I don't think that was ever the intention. But the more I talk to people who have been affected by that orientation, it breaks my heart, because that wasn't the original purpose for it anyway. The original purpose was to help us see who we thought we are, to kind of help us wake up to how we show up, but that there's so much more, and to connect with that so much more. And it's unfortunate that it is misused and it hurts people. And when it is actually a vehicle, a body of wisdom for transformation, that's really what it is. Right. And you said also, you asked earlier, and I think I kind of skipped over it, is you said, the intention. And truly, we do have internal motivators that are just feel like, well, that's just right. Isn't that the way everybody would see things? And that those motivators are magnifying, our behaviors, or they're nourishing those behaviors that aren't really so helpful for us anymore. So we really do need to explore what's underneath, and actually both books, but in the Deep Living book, I have, these iceberg models that show, well, this is what the behaviors look like on top, that are more visible, and some of the emotional pieces, but then underneath, like the inner critic and some of the other forces, some of the other factors that all feel like they actually make us feel oh, this is an internal coherency. So I have this story that this is who I am, but it's based on faulty motivators that were needed. We needed to have our protection, and that's what the personality is. It's a protection or coping mechanism. We needed that when we were younger, but we didn't know how to respond. We didn't have the resources otherwise. But now,
authority or ability or autonomy at that time.
That's right. But now, people who are watching and listening to your podcast, they're no doubt wanting something more in their life, right? And to fulfill themselves in another way, have purpose, have meaning, to engage with life with what really matters to them. And these internal motivators deserve to be acknowledged and worked with a bit.
Since some of the audience may not know what the Enneagram is, could you give maybe a Coles Notes version, and I know it can get quite complex and there's a lot of different things to it, but maybe just sort of something that would give people enough curiosity to go look into it a little further, and if you have a resource maybe where they could start to learn about
yes
and how to apply it, that would be amazing. Just give us
of course
beginner's notes.
Indeed. Well, so the Enneagram is looks like a symbol, and there's a symbol, and the symbol incorporates 9 different versions of who human beings are. 9 different ways that we show up in the world, 9 different kind of forms of consciousness, and they are often called personality types. We're actually finding, I have some colleagues who are scientists, and they're discovering there is no such thing as type, but there are patterns, and that's really, I'm much more comfortable. We have 9 different sets of patterns, and each pattern is connected directly to a higher dimension of who we are, a more expanded nature, our essential nature, of who we are. So in that way, learning and being able to identify which set of patterns you most relate to, and I'll say I relate to most the 0.9 on the Enneagram. Okay. But that's not who I am. And that's what people kind of, we want to make it concrete. We want to have a for sure, and this is to say, oh, this is an opportunity to look at what some of the patterns are. And I was on the floor in shock when I realized, oh, the way I experience myself and I think of myself, that's not just a personal thing. It's not personal. There's 1/9 of the population on the whole globe relate to that in some way, so I identify with it, but it is not who I am. And so, there's so much more. And so that's what I encourage people to do. So again, it's the Enneagram is really a way to discover more about it. Gives you really clear pictures of how you express yourself that you may not be aware of, because we have stories about how we express ourselves. I thought I was the most generous person ever. So I identified with, I thought it's oh, 0.2, call the helper.
Yeah. I was
Oh,
just gonna say, you must be a two. Yeah.
yeah. And
Fill that
then
box.
I realized, well, yeah, I can be generous, but that's not my primary identification. So it takes time. It's not as simple as taking a test and saying, oh, so I end up as a 7. That's who I am. That's not the purpose. It's really about exploring it. So some resources. Well, I'll tell you that my latest book is the short book, 130 pages, and it's Underneath Your Personality, Discover Greater Well-Being Through Deep Living with the Enneagram. So that's a good, it's also, it's an ebook and it's also an audio.
Yes.
But if you can go also onto our websites, and I'll give you a couple of websites. deeplivinglab.org is Deep Living Lab is the organization that provides offerings based mostly on this work, Deep Living Lab, right? So you can sign up. You can get a free download from that book, Deep Living with the Enneagram. And you can also go and research, and it'll show you there's some pages you can read about it. Oh, what is the Enneagram? And, just learn more about it that way. And also on my own author website, which is Roxanne Howe-Murphy.com. And you can get I'll just say you can get a free download of the first 25 pages or so of Underneath Your Personality. And if you go to www.deepwithin.co. CO. That'll take you to my site as well. You can sign up, get a download of the first 25 pages or so of that book. So that'll give you some, introductions. And my website also has more information. It's just free, to get into.
Yes. Yes. And then, so once you started incorporating Enneagram, like just from your own experience into your coaching practice, so bringing the two together, how did that shift the outcomes and the results that you really wanted to see beforehand? Were you starting to see that difference and transformation?
Yeah, it was incredible. Because, it's also based on my, this is what we call presence-based work. So we're kind of calming down the mental activity and just being here in the body and being willing to be with the client. And so before, I would say my personality was coaching to the other person's personality. And what I discovered, my presence is coaching to the other person's presence, even if they're wouldn't consider themselves present, but that's what I'm focusing on. And so as we started looking at some of those drivers that affect how we show up, and, those patterns are pretty deeply ingrained. So it takes a while to release them, to heal around them, to let them go and see what else shows up. That then there were really sustainable changes. And it could be, moms, how they related to their children. I remember one mom who had a child who was so different from her. And this happens to a lot of parents, right? My first parents say, well, my child's just an offspring, mine should act like I do, think like I do, and this child was diametrically different. And so the mom thought, either there's something really wrong with me or there's something really wrong with my child. And as she discovered this little kid, what was going on, and it had to do with how even at 4 years old, the personality was showing up and how this child felt so, either dismissed or not seen. And she recognized that she was just able to embrace this child for who he was. And it had changed their relationship, through the years. He's more than a teenager now. But so at that level, or in looking at work, shifts in work. But I think, people really get in touch with their deeper nature and appreciate it so much more. And they are honoring themselves. And perhaps most important in all of this is that regardless of the outward changes they make, they have more self-acceptance, which is huge. More self-acceptance, able to see the inner critic, but not take it on. And that's a very powerful thing. And what this is a common comment. As I've gone through this and I've gone through my own transformation, it seems to me like everything in the world has changed. Everything around me has changed. But it hasn't. If I look at it very objectively, no, people are still fighting. There's still, all the stuff that goes on, either my family, around me, at work, in the world.
People
that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I changed, and how I relate to it changed. So it's how I relate to what's happening, and I can still stay much, I can be much more at home in myself.
Yes.
I can be much more at home in myself, much more comfortable in myself. And, we've seen people, we go, I want some of what she has. Right? Yeah. And you're probably seeing that person is more connected to their whole nature, and comfortable and accepting and kind of embodying it.
Mm-hmm. It's a very strong energy that comes from someone that's very comfortable with themselves. And it's a really beautiful, serene, secure feeling. Even when there is disagreement or discord, there's a safety with a person that is just really comfortable. They're going to keep the problem as the problem and not make it. It's a beautiful way to be, but it's a journey to get there.
It is a journey, and it takes courage. It takes courage to let go of some of the things that have been so socially accepted, or what we think other people want from us or need from us. If I think, well, I have to look really good to this person, and in order to do that, I just have to always be my best. And recognizing, well, if I'm always pushing to be the best, boy, what's the effect? What's the consequence? And to recognize that the world won't fall apart and I won't die because I am pulling into myself more. I am more at home with myself. I am paying attention to what I'm telling myself. I'm paying attention to my sensations and what my body, our body can have this urge to, move forward. It's like, oh, I know how to come back. I take breaths.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. Sometimes I say, I've lived with this body for 49 and a half years, and the things I'm still discovering that are going on inside of it are unbelievable. There's so much, it's the iceberg, right? There's just so much to learn and experience and understand. It's really wonderful, actually.
Oh my gosh. I just think we are amazing. We are amazing beings. Mostly, people don't recognize that. And because the critic, again, is like, you're going to get too big for your britches. Probably heard that at some point, and growing up, or, back off, you're not such a big deal. Right. But, so the inner critic can also blow us up as well as deflate us. And which a lot of people aren't aware of, that it's always trying to make us do something. And when we can just recognize, oh, I can be me.
Mm-hmm.
I can be me without all that efforting. And so that's a distinction, if we're always efforting, that's a personality at work. If I can do some of that same work, same task with more ease, because I'm more at ease in myself, oh, then I'm probably more integration of my human nature, my personality, and my more expansive nature, my true nature.
Love it.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I would just love to know what do you think if someone's listening to this and they're like, yes, I want to know myself better. I want to start making a positive difference in my own life and then eventually the lives of others. What would be the most important thing that they could know walking away from this episode?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, most of your members know about the inner critic, and we've been talking about it. But the most important thing we can do is change our relationship to the inner critic. And what that means is recognizing, and the inner critic can operate on loud, like right blasting, the knob is turned all the way up, or it can be really subtle and it can just kind of be this little, it's very tricky. It's very tricky. And it can show up in just every part of life. And it's typically a belittling energy. It can be a voice. It could also be a sense of depression. It could be a knot in the stomach. It's like not feeling good about yourself, right? Or it could be the reverse. It could be like, oh, I have to be great today. I have to be the best today. That's also the inner critic. So once we get to know,
I was just going to say, are intrusive thoughts also the inner critic?
Intrusive thoughts, say more about what you mean by that.
Like when you assume after you leave a social gathering that everybody's talking about how weird you are. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I'm laughing loud again. I know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, I have left those parties. And actually, sometimes what shows up, and this is a hard one. This is a hard one to come into contact with. Most of us don't want to talk about it, but it's here. I left this gathering. It was a very wonderful gathering. And we're driving home, and I just felt this sense of shame. And it was, and that for me is in my heart. It stings, it burns, and it just is this horrible feeling. That's a version of the inner critic. Mm-hmm. That's an emotional way it shows up. And when I recognized it, I was like, what are you doing here? And I just kept breathing into my heart. It's like, and into my whole body. Like, I see you here. So part of it is saying, like, naming it. I see you. You're here. Shame, you're here. Belittling voice, you're here. And breathing. And then, I put my hand on my heart. My fingers are my hand. And I bring attention into my heart and have compassion and have kindness for myself. Like, I didn't try to make that happen. I didn't try to create a sense of shame or inner critic, the critic message, but it's there. So it starts to put that energy, oh, there it is, but I'm here. I have breath. I can put my feet on the floor and connect to the ground. Mm-hmm. Breathe into my body. And, oh, what's true? What's really true? And so it's just not, most people think, and I understand this, I did for a long time, that the inner critic, it is, and there's nothing you can do about it. Either I just accept it, or maybe I'm always fighting it, like, get out of here, or I'm trying to get rid of it in some way, but this isn't, we do have inner critics. They exist. That's part of our personality structure. Sorry. But, so it's up to us to change how we relate to it. In other words, not taking it on as, oh, this is the truth. This is real. It can sound like the voice of God. Mm-hmm. It can sound like your Aunt Ginger, or Uncle Harry, or, your school teacher, or the minister. It's not the voice of God, but it could, we carry those voices from our past. And it's like, whose voice is this? We might ask. What am I hearing? It's not mine. It's not mine. This was that person's voice. That was what was going on for them. It is irrelevant to me. So I'll just say, in the Deep Living with the Enneagram book, there's a big chapter 17 on changing your relationship to the inner critic. And it's, I think it's quite valuable. There's a lot there. And there is a course, a self-paced course at Deep Living Lab on the inner critic. And people can go to the deeplivinglab.org and look for it. And if that sounds interesting, my colleague Marcia Hyatt recorded it, and from a live course. It's very good, and it can be really supportive if this is an issue that you're aware of and dealing with in your life.
I love that. I really believe that if you take this journey, especially if it's new to you, that inner critic is usually fairly loud. That's why it's really valuable to have resources like you offer. And if you have the means to find a coach that can be that companion through that process, because it's really hard to do if you've never done it or been down there before. And if it's really different to the way you've thought about yourself or the world, it's going to take some support as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we do have coaches at the lab. So, and you can look them up, and you can interview, does this person feel like a good fit for me? But everyone approaches this with compassion and love, and recognizing, you'll be seen. And any class that you take through the lab, you'll be seen, I think. And that's such an important part where you can be vulnerable and share what is, feels true for you in the moment. And I have that recognized and heard by other people, and also maybe challenge them. Like, oh, what else is possible for you? What else is here for you just besides that issue? So there's another thing I think I wanted to say. Oh, I know what it is. So I guess that some of or a lot of your audience, they are in the midst of some kind of change in their life. I mean, we're all in the midst of change, like it or not.
Yeah, 50, there's a big change happening. Yeah.
There's big change, right? Exactly. Wow. Yeah, no kidding. And some of you are maybe in the midst of personal change. You're in a life transition, you're moving, maybe you're in midlife, or you're moving into new work, but you're not quite sure, or you just want to know yourself better. The inner critic does not like change. So it is one of the first things that will say, well, who do you think you are? You don't really need that. Oh my, just stay the way you are, come on. And that's kind of accepting the personality without any curiosity, any openness, any way to kind of, I wonder what else is here, without kind of attuning to yourself and listening to what else wants to come forth. So just to know that the inner critic is really, really pops up in the midst of change, because it doesn't like it. It really tries to keep us in a box.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for your time and sharing so much of your wisdom and your expertise and just your heart and your personal stories. I just really appreciate you and your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing Deep Living with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Chrissy. I have loved this. It's been, it just felt very nurturing for me as well. So thank you for your appreciation of the work. And I really, it's just amazing. And so I love being with you.
Thank you. Me too.